All right, let's see. Are we live? We are live. Welcome, everybody, to the MOCA Live podcast. But there's no way we have an audience yet because we need that 30-second graphic that Restream took away from us in order to get people to understand what's going on.
So zero views.
All right, 0 views. Let's start it. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the MOCA Live podcast. My name is Max Cohen. I will be one of your hosts for our first episode in quite a while. It is 4:02 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here in beautiful, sunny, 72-degree Brooklyn, New York. And I am joined, as always, for the MOCA Live podcast by Mr. Colborn Bell, founder of the Museum of Crypto Art. How are you, Colborn?
I'm doing so well, Max. Thank you so much.
Excellent. And joining us is our guest, a friend of the MOCA Live podcast for his third appearance on the podcast. Am I correct? 3?
Maybe second or third at least.
Second or third at least. That would be Untitled XYZ, Metaverse Architect Extraordinaire and friend to all Metaversalists. How are you, Untitled? What's going on?
I am doing great. Great to be here with you guys and chat about all good things Metaverse.
Fantastic. Let's chat about all good things Metaverse. Okay, so our last show was in January, I think, and I'm sure we did not talk about the Metaverse too much even before then because I don't think it's breaking any new ground to suggest that we're like long past the fall of the Metaverse as a buzzword. So here we are. It's May of 2025, and I don't know, maybe rather than a lengthy introduction about how the Metaverse has changed, perhaps Untitled, it would be better just to ask you, like, what's the state of the Metaverse right now? Obviously, we're going to talk about a lot more in it, and specifically like MOCA's, your and MOCA's like new foray into the Metaverse with unmuseums and the next flourish of MOCA rooms. But take us through the Metaverse. What's going on? What's happening? Are we back? Is anybody back in the Metaverse?
We're in it right now. No, it's now become like the M word. People call it the M word from like diehard Metaverse folks are just sort of like just tired of the defense around around some of the terminology, which I think is just interesting. Generally speaking, it feels like we are past a critical phase of growth and maturity for this. I think we're getting past, fingers crossed, like the land phase of this, which is where people were, was largely associated with the M word was largely associated for a while with virtual land being bought, sold, speculated on, rarely built on. And I think what this new kind of iteration of the web as it kind of is arriving, that was kind of a natural phase. There's going to be many phases of this, but I mean, for people who like myself who are just really immersed in this stuff all the time, it seems pretty obvious to me, and I know to us here, like the internet will not be two-dimensional forever. This is going to happen. The things that need to be set in place for it to happen are, you need software and hardware to kind of like catch up and make things more accessible, and for the culture to embrace it, and for content to be easy to build and create in these spaces. So I guess to answer your question is there are two things that are happening right now. Like you have the maturity of this is happening. You're past the phase of kind of this, Wild West speculative moment. And now you have people who are really building influential projects that are still here, still creating, and you have hardware that's being developed and worked on, and you have, really incredible developments like open source projects that are really pushing the ball forward. So, yeah.
So, Colborn, when you hear that kind of explanation from Untitled about the Metaverse, does that remind you of a specific, like, I don't know, similar kind of time period, whether in crypto or crypto art, as like that we can maybe draw an analog to?
That's a wonderful question. I think the answer is no. I've never been in crypto where the hype cycle is so low. Like just like the sense of wonder, mystique, or where we're going places, or like what is next for us. There's never been something to be so unexcited about. And that is it's like kind of different. You know, it's like how many times can we get ourselves into thinking, you know, meme coins are the next big thing? That's tough. You know, I think I don't even know if there's like even particularly artists to be so excited about. Everybody just seems kind of washed.
Fair, but like I think to have a moment of the metaverse where like there's no hype whatsoever, right? I guess I'm wondering if there was maybe in like the 2010s somewhere, and perhaps Untitled, you have an opinion on this as well, a moment when there was a feverish amount of hype and then everything died down, and then you kind of had just this very a much more contracted community of believers and builders and devs who were working on like the structural underpinning to a thing, even though it had long since kind of in the minds maybe of the mainstream or even the minds of like the not super committed but interested public, kind of risen and faded out of view. Like I don't know so much personally about like the 2018 Ethereum ecosystem right after the big kind of first crash, at least the first that I remember. Was that similar in any kind of sense? I suppose
kind of like, you know, you had the ICO boom. I mean, people in crypto in general, I think people are just going to try. They're going to try things, and when they try them hard.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone goes hard into that thing because of, you know, FOMO and the hyper financialization of all of it. I think, you know, one weird thing about the metaverse and blockchain in general is you don't have to like hyper financialize it in order to improve and use it and build on it in a way. Like, I don't know if that's totally true, but I think in a way you have a natural progression of a technology, and there's going to be moments where you have tech breakthroughs that don't necessarily correspond to like huge amounts of money being poured in all at the same, you know, flow of it, I guess, if that makes sense. So I don't know. It feels like in crypto you have these like incredible cycles that happen. But yeah, I don't know. Like, obviously, I mean, people have buried the metaverse over and over and over in the last like year, brutally, to the point where I think it's just like I just want to think the opposite. And I don't know, like, it's not like there were that many people there when it was thriving anyway. So I kind of see the same people. I mean, no one is like doing well, so to speak, but the the motivation is still there. So it's kind of a weird. I mean, to Colborn's point, it's weird. It's a weird time.
It's a weird time for the world writ large.
Yeah.
You know, structurally, things are breaking down in unprecedented ways. And all of this, you know, risk on, easy money, free credit, all of these trades are starting to unwind, and rubbers is starting to hit the road. And the fact of the matter is like we just don't really know what we're all going to be doing because everything is going to be so different. And I think unrecognizable in a very short period.
I love getting to this point 10 minutes into the podcast.
I know, it's so bad.
It's like a
Why do we always end up here?
No, that's the thing. It's great to end up here, but now I have to like walk us back. Like,
yeah, I am the common denominator, or we are the common denominator. It's
Colborn, how's it going? It's all going to shit.
Well, I mean, the subtext, obviously, of what you're talking about is also, I think, the subject that we want to talk about today, which is AI. And my read on the metaverse is that it will be like many things, maybe all things, is the subtext of Colborn's comments, that are just fundamentally and unpredictably upended by the introduction of AI into its systems. You know, Untitled, you had mentioned just a moment ago that the same people in the metaverse then are the same people in the metaverse now. It was never really populated at its height. And I know that one of the things that I've heard you talk about and heard other kind of metaverse folks talk about is like, what does it look like in the metaverse when it no longer just has to be populated by people, right? It can be populated by metaverse avatars in the guise of AI agents, or AI agents in the guise of avatars who always live in the metaverse. And thus there are no empty spaces. There are always peopled, and you don't always know who's who. And thus you are, I guess, either assuming at all times that everyone around you is real, or assuming at all times that everyone around you is not real. But either way, there is a life of some kind happening around you in these spaces. So I mean, this is really what I want to talk about. And I think this is also really like the thrust of Unmuseums and what we've been building with rooms. But as I guess more of a broad question, like, can you walk us through AI development through the metaverse lens of late? Like, have you seen agents, protocols, processes that are AI driven, like changing your metaverse experience?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, has already, and it's going to have a massive impact on kind of virtual world building. I think the biggest bottleneck we saw with the Metaverse 1.0, or whatever you want to call it, was content creation. 3D content is difficult to make. It's difficult to optimize, it's difficult to format, and it's difficult to install in the like dozens of different SDKs and workflows that will ultimately get it to a virtual setting that you can experience with others. That process is that those friction points are going to be and have already been kind of diminished greatly. I think what we're going to see now is a huge I can't even speak, proliferation of content that is going to take, prompt text to world building, prompt to object, prompt to architecture, prompt to character. You're going to be able to populate these previously empty virtual plots with tons of stuff. And that can be cooperative, that can be solo. And then, of course, you have the agentic part of it too, where the people and the creatures that you interact with are intelligent and have a point of view and want to engage with you, or maybe not. And that adds a whole different flavor to this that really we haven't even touched yet. I think it's going to be, I mean, we've seen with like in Hyperfy and Eliza OS, we're starting to see characters move on their own. They're navigating these worlds. I know, with on Cyber or Awe, their new world engine, like a lot of these different platforms are experimenting with this. I'm pretty sure all of them are, because agentic influence in these spaces or generative 3D in these spaces, it's going to be huge. So I'm very excited about that. I think that's going to, take previously what was a pretty, plain experience of like you're there in a world and you might have like one thing to look at to a really dynamic, interesting place. I'm excited about that. I think it's going to be huge. But maybe one thing to add to that, right now we're in this weird like bubble of talking about how agents are like literal avatars, but we don't have to put an agent into like our own person. That's kind of a weird, like very literal way in my eyes to use an agent in a space. Like I want an agent to be a building that then reacts to things that are happening to it. Like we don't have to just put them in a VRM avatar and have it be like, hi, here, welcome to my world. Let me walk you around. Like we can be a lot more immersive and creative than that, I think, which will be fun to see.
So this is just like a totally new metaphysical avenue for your like war on skeuomorphism.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think, and static architecture. I think the problem with the last iteration of the metaverse, everything was fixed. It was static. It wasn't agile. It couldn't move. You have these heavy 3D meshes that just sit there. And that is how we build in the real world. Things don't move. They sit there. They're brick and concrete. We are doing the same thing with like avatars where we're like, I want me over there and I want to look like me here, there. It's like, no. We can do this totally differently. You can create these kind of sentient creatures that have no precedent. And that could be architecture. It could be humanoid, hopefully something in between. Max, did you freeze? Did we lose Max?
Oh my gosh, we did.
I thought I bored him to death. Oh no.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we'll have to carry it from here. Let's see. I won't try and doom and gloom this. I agree. There's been. Oh, there you are.
Sorry.
That I think is the only prevailing narrative, right? Is how do we take everything that was created and push it through the filter of agentic AI? right? And then suddenly, we begin to talk about like multimodal models and agents kind of cooperatively working to, and it can get really out of hand really quick. As far as like loss of autonomy, the pace of creation, individualization, how critical your data is to supplying all of this. It really is going to like reform and terraform certainly the virtual world and definitely the physical world to an unrecognizable place. And it's interesting that, well, I don't quite have the words for it, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, it's
Just ask
interesting.
ChatGPT.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like where's the value? It's going to be tough to figure out. We have all these experiments, right? And all these, it's going to be a radical terraforming of the internet. Where does the value land? What's sticky? What ultimately will drive value back to humans? That kind of
I
feels
think,
like to me.
yeah, I think the like appropriate metaphor, maybe we should talk about all of this and how this all came about, was like the idea we had for rooms. What it took you as an architect to go design and build rooms, to go try and bring other architects to go design and build rooms, and now the workflow that led to unmuseums, and how we as an organization museum that is pretty light, nimble, and acts as a broad think tank and research group in these new emergent technologies, with this always kind of in our sight, what like ground the plane in a project that we were working on. Who wants to tell that narrative?
Untitled, you built it, but I am happy to recount it, and you can jump in at points and correct me, 'cause I'm sure I got it wrong.
No. No. Sorry, Max, you were going to go ahead.
So my understanding of rooms when we first built it, and the reason I feel like I can speak about this is, I'm writing about it too, and I've been revisiting kind of our old essays that we were writing and Untitled that you were writing, and just kind of like how we were framing rooms. And this is back in late 2021, early 2022, right? So more or less a completely different universe than the one we're living in now. And the kinds of things that we had envisioned for rooms that I think then we thought were, I don't want to say achievable, because I think that they are still achievable, but I think in hindsight, right, at the height of metaverse fervor, it really seemed like all we needed to get the totality, especially within crypto art, the totality kind of across the threshold and into these virtual worlds was just like a use case, right? That like the infrastructure, like whether it was Somnium or Hyperfi, and because so many artists had experience using like crypto voxels. And at that time, like Deca and OnCyber were kind of new and they were there. So you had all these tools that made it pretty easy for people to get into a metaverse space. And all you needed was a reason to be there. And so when we first designed rooms, it was this like conceptual and efficacy-based idea that, well, we're solving a problem. There's not enough curation. There's not enough exhibition. Let's take away all the guardrails. Let's provide a place, these 3D art galleries, essentially, that you had hand designed and people like Polygonal Minds and Warwag and others had like hand designed, and you'd be able to exhibit in these virtual worlds. And we knew, even at the time, or we believed, that it was easy enough to just purchase a Hyperfi world and have a plot of land and throw in a couple of, VRMs with a landscape and a background, throw in your building, and boom, you can invite people to come in and look at these exhibitions. And it seemed very near, like the outcome of that, right? The highest minded outcome seemed within the range of possibilities at the time, right? That we really would have lots of people adopting the metaverse as a place to show their own work. Collectors would use it as a place to curate their own work. We would just see a lot more metaverse art exhibitions. Obviously there was so much fervor, so it seemed like we were building up towards a point. And I don't think any of us expected this kind of like crash where turns out nobody was really using it. No single use case was that penetrative into the public consciousness. But I mean, again, at the time, like we thought it would revolutionize crypto art. We thought it would revolutionize exhibition. We thought it would revolutionize the traditional art world, because why would you pay so much money for a physical gallery space when you can invite people into, a metaverse space, and obviously everything was just too early, as seems to be always the case, right? Like the friction to building was still just a little bit too much, and I don't think the visual language was quite widespread enough for people to know what to do. Even myself, I had Hyperfi rooms, I had like your rooms. Knowing what to do when you got into one of these spaces was still like being paralyzed by possibilities,
Yeah.
So I think there's a reason that the last time we sold a room pass, and we sold a lot, right? We sold like 160 of them, between February 2022 when the first one went to Giselle Flores, and the last one I think was December 5th, 23. And a lot of those were just either being burned otherwise, or we were self-collecting them. But you can kind of trace the whole kind of arc of the metaverse in terms of how much people were willing to pay for these objects, and then in what kind of amount at the time. And then obviously the complete collapse of that program, I think, coincided with kind of the death of the metaverse as a concept. I mean, we have Emotional in the chat right now, and Emotional's Fediverse always felt to me like it was kind of along the same train. It was like deeply personal and deeply artistic. And I think one of the ideas I had for rooms was that, or one of the ideas we had for rooms was that you would have these whole metaverse spaces that were like artist tailored, and it would say something about you as the owner of those spaces, that you had, one of Emotional's characters kind of in there, or a building designed by Polygonal Minds or yourself, Untitled, and like this said things about yourself and what you were collecting and what you were interested in, and that would communicate things outwards. Obviously a lot of time has passed, and here we are. How do you feel? Did I miss anything?
You crushed that.
I felt like very top of mind.
No, and like shout out to Null, because he's one of the like most incredible creators who really embrace the whole Fediverse kind of universe. Is like wildly creative, so interesting. Full disclosure, I'm a big collector of his characters, and I use them. I love them. I think they're probably the more interesting works I've seen of any virtual creator, and like for sure, I know it's a challenging time for folks like us who are kind of trying to figure out where is the sustainable path in this scene. I think, like to your point, Max, with rooms, we're trying to build landmarks. The virtual world is this vast empty place. There's no kind of anchor points, and we were trying to build these anchor points that could help settle art, digital art, in a virtual setting that is outside of this like horrific, banal and toxic 2D news feed of Twitter.
Yeah.
And it's just not, Twitter is not the right setting for art. It's horribly toxic, and we're seeing a lot of all this stuff play out now, just in how toxic it is. But like I still think, and I think anyone who builds in these kind of virtual settings will agree, this is a new type of public space. Creating a virtual world, this is taking the kind of 2D feeds, giving it space to kind of breathe as in a 3-dimensional environment. And I do think one of the earliest examples of that will be these kind of like digital art galleries that are anchors and service places where people can come together and have discussion. Like meetups are still happening, tours are still happening. I think it's certainly not as much, or the frequency is a lot less. But I think that's kind of a product too of like the tools have not been there to be able to build fast enough in these worlds, adapt quickly enough in these worlds, because 3D is a huge challenge. It's difficult. It's hard to build. But now with prompt stuff, I think that's going to change. I think that's an inflection point.
Excellent segue. Doing my job for me. Because I think the prompt stuff, and I think that AI generation coming to metaverse spaces is kind of a game changer, in the sense that like, we are still, my understanding is we're still pretty far from like text to world, but part of the reason that we're talking today is Unmuseums, this new collection of rooms that you've created, which are in some ways text to architecture. And I mean, I have a million questions on those, of course, but like before we go into that, can you kind of ground us and also like the audience in where AI generated, AI assisted architecture is? How does that exist? Is it prolific? Is it already prolific? Where can you find it? And also, you know, how early are we in this chat here in like adding to the narrative, and you adding to the narrative of like AI architecture?
Yeah, for sure. Also, I think that siren passed by me like 2 minutes ago. It's going to
Moving south through Brooklyn.
different part of Brooklyn. Yeah, no, I think like Unmuseums has been a huge transformation for my practice. It really represents a lot of and traces a lot of my journey with AI and with 3D and kind of understanding new technology, putting it to use, putting it to practice. I think we're very, very early in that there really aren't a whole lot of examples of architecture in 3D in these virtual worlds yet. There's a lot of like object prompting, like you can build a hammer or a tree or a treasure chest, but not a lot of like prompt me a full immersive enclosure that I can walk through and into. For me, I like, so I started a lot of this AI, generative 3D work about a year and a half ago, trying to figure out what we could use with Comfy. And it's been a huge learning process. It's been like a really interesting and giant headache along the way as well. But like, I think with Unmuseums, if I remember your question correctly, because I ramble, a lot of it was trying to figure out and capture what generative 3D looks like right now. A lot of it you'll see in this series, these are very raw structures. They're kind of uniform in their texture, but they have these kind of like continuous surface sort of parametric styled kind of like clay look about them. And that's very purposeful. I think like right now the technology is such that it's still difficult to generate a very complex building that you can walk through. You can create the object or the shell I was telling you about, but actually prompting it and kind of finessing the prompt to build something that has loops or apertures or doorways that you can kind of maneuver through and have levels to that. That took a lot of finesse and trying to get it to work. And it was just such a cool discovery process to figure out how to get that to work and then test it out in a virtual setting and actually walk through it for the first time. So all of these are very kind of primitive structures that I think are meant to capture where that technology looks and acts right now. I think one example, I wrote this in my note because I just want to say, because I was going to previously call this series, Colborn knows it by a couple names, but one was Slopitecture, because we're in this kind of like AI slop phase. Everything's kind of like repetitive and glitchy and a little bit bizarre. Like I wanted to embrace that and try to create a 3D version of that where it's a little sloppy, it's a little kind of glitchy, and there's some surfaces that don't totally work or connect where you see where they're trying to. And I think that's such a cool feature that we should celebrate and not kind of like shy away from. So that's a long-winded explanation. But I think, yeah, for me, this series was really about capturing the moment that we're in and really trying to push the envelope a little bit in creating spaces that are not just shells and enclosures of fixed objects. They're these really open sculptural places that really don't have a wall, don't have a ceiling, don't have a floor. It's kind of all this, different kind of space that maybe is a little bit more honest about what the virtual world is and needs to be.
How much like iteration was necessary from you to end up where you ended up? Like how many, like what was I don't know, what did these start out looking like? And what were you, I'm asking you for like very specific, touchstones, but like, what were you attracted to? Like when you first started this process, what did you say? Okay, well I can shape this way. Okay, well this isn't doing this. Add the texture. Like what was the process of bringing basically like a new, I don't want to call it like a completely new art form because I don't have the context, but like a fairly novel way of like approaching both metaverse architecture and AI artistry. Like, how did you know where you were going?
Yeah, it's a good question. I did not. Like, you go deep into these forums of like Reddit and chat rooms to figure out how to install Comfy UI. Like all of these have been generated locally on my computer. You can of course go to a website or a Hugging Face model now and kind of prompt your way into something, but that's using, another computer, that's using someone else's compute. And I wanted to use everything locally on my machine, see what it's capable of, and generate everything. Like, the process is very important to me in that way. It also helps, a creator understand the guts of what they're doing. And that's extremely important to me as an architect. You have to know how a building works. So for me, the first model I used with Comfy was called CRM. It's a model out of like Tsinghua University, if I'm pronouncing that right. But the first thing that I did was generate cubes, because you guys know I love cubes, and houses. Like, prompt for a house, describe different types of houses, and you can see I actually minted one on Super Rare called Prompt House. This was in December, but it's literally a goopy looking house. And it doesn't have windows or doorways that you can enter. It's just the shell that I was saying. You didn't get a lot of depth in the detail of it. You could kind of get these kind of goopy, mushy looking, architectural things. And at the time, that was kind of like as complicated as it could get. Honestly, only in the last like 3-4 months have 3D models really just exploded. So it was like that for about 6 months, where I kept getting goopy results, and I love them. They were kind of haunted looking in a way. But now, like, the model I use, or one of the resources I used to generate unmuseums, was a model called Trellis. It's developed by Microsoft, actually, and that's basically how one of a workflow in Comfy UI uses Trellis, and then you can kind of go from text into a 3D object that is a lot more complex and a lot more, like, has greater depth, more complexity in the mesh, a lot more kind of ways to fine tune it. And it was wild. Like, it's only been, it was kind of the goopy haunted mode for about 6 months, and then in the last 3, now people are generating these beautifully textured, really advanced 3D objects.
Let me stop you quickly. Like, who is Trellis for? Like, who's using this tool other than like you and metaverse architects worldwide? Like, is this like game engineers? Like, just you.
No. They have. So a lot of we've seen this with like there are a handful of websites now where you can go in and generate 3D objects by text. All of those apps, these are just services at this point, use some sort of model on the back end that allows them to generate those things. And they're probably using, some sort of, Comfy process through this. So, a lot of them are going to be used by gaming creators who need assets, who are looking to create things. Like I said, treasure chests, trees, hammers, stuff that kind of like add richness to a game or to an environment. I haven't seen a lot of architecture yet. I think right now everyone is so focused on like vibe coding and gaming experiences that it's not quite on like, how do we, which I think is a mistake. Like, we need to really take seriously these kind of anchor points and things that kind of ground us in a place, not just have an experience for 2 minutes and leave it. Like, we need a commons and really need to take that seriously. But yeah, a lot of them are gaming developers. They're building assets.
Interesting. So it was goopy. Trellis comes along. I'd like to jump over to Colborn. Like, the first just stated version of this idea. Like, I mean, what were the conversations you two had at the beginning of this? Like, Untitled, you had said that Colborn knows unmuseums by many names. Like, when it was, in its primordial forms, Like, what was the idea? What were we building towards, and what was the impetus like from your end, or what did you see?
Well, there was we ran into a scale problem, right? That's the impetus, is that it was much more difficult than we anticipated to build these architectures, and it was too consuming. And um, frankly, you do like kind of a survey of the artists in the space that want to go build architecture, even understand how far down we are. There was very few. So in that, we recognized that we needed help. And in the same way, I think that Art Deco's was meant to mark a moment in time that was everything before and everything after. I think this is also kind of critical to recognize that, there was even and even in looking at it through the style of architecture that Untitled XYZ was producing, it's so interesting because everything was so rectilinear. Everything was could be classic in the columns, but spun with neon, and suddenly we're a bit like Otherworld. This is a bit like the movie Arrival, where it's very fluid and amorphous and oddly organic, which is leading me to believe that we are seeding these digital worlds with ourselves, but these digital worlds will not be of our own creation. They will be created by agents and entities and thoughts and feelings that are totally like outside of us. And just like the nature of creation is going to be different, because whereas I used to be dragging and dropping walls or rectangles and building exhibitions, and everything was exactly where I placed it and it was how I did it, it's not going to be that. How things are created is not going to be like that anymore if we're prompting. So we lose a bit of intentionality, but we gain back massive amounts of time. It's a new paradigm.
I love what you were saying about, I think you summed it up really well, like the departure this is from Untitled's previous work. And I'm curious, Untitled, like in your own views, like, I don't know how much you think about like your own kind of scale, right? But obviously this is I've seen a lot of your work for a long time, like really, intimately. Like I've just obviously followed you for a very long time. Like this is a structural, not just aesthetic, but like a structural conceptual change from pretty much everything that you've done, even though you've had moments where like a bit more of like a natural organic thing has kind of begun to seep in your works. But like, how do you view this as changing like your own kind of like artistic continuum? It's like such a hard stop from what you were doing before and such a strong pivot.
Totally. Yeah, it's definitely wildly, I mean, it's such a different workflow to go from hand modeling everything, texturing everything, to text and code and going that route, like, and configuring nodes. Like, so I guess like one thing that I should say is I'm trying to train myself to think. I guess one aspect of these rooms, I should say, all the rooms that I've done are CC0. All of my 3D work is CC0. So it's not, in a weird way, different. I get message from people who are using them a fair amount, and they say I'm using them in this way. And so to me, it's kind of weird because it's not like a linear path of what's the most current state of my work, in a way, if that makes sense. It's almost like there's this web of different nodes of my work that kind of pops up differently. It's not like a straight kind of progress. It's a little bit, I'll be working on one, on unmuseums, and then someone will say, oh, I used, this room as part of a film for this. And it's like, it crops up again, and it's like an extension of my work. So it's a little bit weird. It's kind of like time traveling. It's,
But I think, I know how I know how we made Art Decos, right? What the
yeah,
comfy UI interface looked like. And, there was an opportunity for you to use something similar where you meshed your previous work into something new, right? Especially for rooms, which, exists kind of, even though it's schismed by time period and aesthetic, as this kind of singular body of work. And so I think, I guess the question is, like, how did you resist the temptation not to try and create like reimagined versions of, whatever 30 to 40 previously existing rooms that you had specifically created, and decide to go in this completely, again, like novel direction for you and your work?
yeah. I guess a better answer is I tried. I tried to build cubes and rectilinear things, but it was too goopy. It just didn't. It didn't work. And to me, I was like, well, okay, what does work? What will create without my interference an opening that allows an avatar to walk through? Because as I said before, the CRM model I was using, it was all a shell. It didn't create voids very easily. And then when Trellis came along, it allowed me to start to like finesse some prompts and say, use keywords like Voronoi and aperture and parametric and things that would start to shape a shell or shape a structure differently, that allowed it to be penetrated and allow it to be more kind of like open. So for me, I tried to do it more modularly at the start, but it was not it wasn't working. It wasn't creating anything that you could pass through. It was creating this big shell or wall that was super cool. I think is really neat, but doesn't really function very well in terms of giving a place for an avatar to stage artwork and act as a museum. So that's where I was saying before, I wanted to embrace the slop, like lean into that and see where that took me, even though it was very different than the aesthetics that I had done previously, totally different. But this is a pretty radical shift in technology, and I think generally from what I've seen, like training, it kind of goes back to a project I did last year with Koji. I did these kind of hand-drawn looking columns with plants and machinery and parts kind of coming through them. So I took the column that I had always done in a lot of my work, but I did it in a totally different aesthetic. And part of that is because it seems weird to me to copy exactly what you do by hand and have the machine do it. It just seems weird to me. Like I don't really understand that ego of an artist to kind of like just replicate en masse something that you like. No, I draw that, but you can do other things. Let's tap into that. That's kind of my thought process with that a little bit. I don't know if that makes sense.
What was it? A Cantham? What was the name of the Koji project?
Oh, it was an AI Itera Acanthus or
Itera Acanthus.
Yeah, IA. So flipped.
Yeah. Nice. So correct me if I'm wrong, but like the impetus, and I know Colborn, you had touched on this briefly, was like we basically had like 100+ outstanding room passes that we needed to provide rooms for. And then and when you talk about like the problem of scale, like it was just inconceivable, especially given that like we didn't attract as many architects as I think we had hoped initially to attract to like build these rooms. For I think as much as we wanted to, it was socially unwise to lock Untitled in a room and force him to make rooms all day, every day. And of course we tried, but he's wily and he slipped out of our grasp. What has been, but obviously they're very different than these original works, which were very kind of like hand designed and bespoke. Like you've been reaching out to room pass holders to get these works in their hands. Like what has been the feedback so far from people? There's still a social stigma attached to AI artwork in general. We can pretend it's not there and it's not always there, but it's still like bubbling below the surface. Like what have people said who have received one of these one of these new rooms? Are they stoked? Were they interested in? What kind of what points of the aesthetics or the process are they drawn to?
Is that for me or for Colborn?
I suppose it's for you, but Colborn, if he has opinions.
Yeah, no. So like touching on what Colborn was saying earlier too, just to start this it is very difficult to build in a metaverse platform in an interoperable sense, and that was something we really had as part of Rooms from the get-go, was create a very agile like structure that could move between worlds, that sets it in a very fixed kind of set of circumstances of texture size or file size, polygon count, all these things. We got some brilliant architects to work with us in generating some rooms, but obviously each one is a work of art. It takes a really long time. And fortunately, this tech came around that allowed us to do these at scale. And I'm grateful for that, because I think we can maintain quality while still maintaining creativity and build out this. On museums are a set of like 142 pieces, and I think they're super cool and each very, very unique. To your question, crap, I forgot what was you were saying.
How do people
Are
like
people
them?
reacting?
Yeah.
No. So it's interesting. People are reacting really well. I think there's always, there's some kind of like hesitancy around AI, I think, but generally this crowd that we're dealing with, these are early crypto art people who are collecting room passes. These are people who are like down to experiment, want to learn more, want to be like, they have that itch about what a new technology can do creatively. And so it's a really brilliant kind of collector base of people who were early to NFTs, early to crypto in general. And so the sense that I've gotten, the messages I've got are really, really good. And I'm glad, because, even though these are AI generated, they took quite a long time to get to work and to build. So yeah, I'm very, very pleased with the reactions. And I think it'll only get better as the tools get better for them to use them.
So I think that segues very nicely into just kind of my last question, which is, you both are often, I think, different segments of the tech, crypto art, AI worlds. Like, how long do you think, and Kirk, we can start with you, like, how long do you think before we see like entire programmatically generated like virtual worlds and buildings, and like the true kind of arrival of like text to world generation, in the sense that people can and are very easily drumming up buildings, environments, details, agents, etc., in an interface and just setting it free?
Yeah, I mean, the vibe code sort of culture has been interesting to watch, because people are using AI as an assist to basically spin up not just worlds but games that function a certain way, all in like 3JS or other languages that allow them to kind of like have immersive experiences. That's been interesting to watch. I think that's kind of we're gonna see more of. You enter that blank world that you're talking about, and you have a text box or an agent there to assist and call an architect, and give it instructions to populate an environment with. You'd have landscape, buildings. I think we're very close to that, but it's going to take probably. I mean, at the rate that generative 3D is improving, it'll probably be within a year. It's hard to know, because this is kind of like, imagine the difference of when we couldn't generate images with AI they were all goopy. They all look like, nude portraits or, weird, funky things. And then all of a sudden you get more clarity, you get more specificity, you can transfer styles. Like, we're kind of entering the same cycle with 3D, where it was very goopy last summer. Now into the spring, you're getting a lot more detail with and specificity with what you can build. So I imagine it's probably on the same path. You're going to 6 months have high fidelity worlds that you can really navigate. And my hope is that when we do this, the framework that we do it, we can adapt it quickly. Like if we can have a really interesting populated world quickly, then it's competitive with Twitter. Then it's competitive with a lot of these platforms that will look super archaic and boring by comparison. But that's the trick. These 2D apps have to look boring by comparison. I don't know. What do you think, Colborn? What do you think?
I really am at a loss. I think it is going to, what we don't have is like distribution and organization and consensus, right? That was kind of always the Twitter mechanism, but that was co-opted by forces that kind of manipulated those metrics so that authenticity and trust was lost. How do we get back into a virtuous cycle with another distribution mechanism in which the other person, because at the time we at least knew the other end was a person, is going to act in your best interest. So I think fundamentally, like the trust was lost. I think early crypto art was all about that virtuous cycle, right? It was about connection, trust, and that was creating value. Eventually that was extracted and removed. And now we have to assume that everything on the other side is going to be replaced by agents. So I don't know, man. I think it is going to be something totally that we haven't seen. It could be digital worlds for sure. It could be experience crafting. I don't know. All I know is that the kids who grew up playing Minecraft are getting older, and they'll probably be the ones to figure it out. But it'll be some experience like that.
Well said.
Because, I grew up on like Game Boy and N64, and that was always in relation to that. There at the best there were bots on the other side of the screen in something like maybe like Perfect Dark, that video game. I remember that being like a big invention, or GoldenEye, when you had your friends in the room, or even when it, started to get into like Halo and you could play in LAN parties or across the internet. I think those are the experiences that inform where we're going, and give it a couple more years. I think those people who've always had that experience of like being in world and building together in worlds, where that is kind of their pride, they'll be the ones to tell us.
Well, I wrote 2 years ago, or I did some research 2 years ago for an article, that half of all American teenagers or American children under the age of 16 played Roblox. Half. Right. So that's half of all American kids under the age of 16 as of 2023 who had experience not only spending time in virtual worlds, but also navigating and building within them. But obviously we can talk about this topic for a whole nother hour, because I feel like we just opened another can of worms. So why don't we cut it off here? Just a couple of quick questions before we go. Colborn, how are the Lakers doing in the playoffs? And Untitled, how are the Sixers doing?
I think they're like hurt and broken.
Oh yeah, that's right. Only the Celtics among our teams are in the playoffs.
Oh, that's so nice.
Okay, so let's go rapid fire. Just who's winning the series? We're going to start with the West. Timberwolves, Warriors. Colborn?
Warriors.
Untitled?
I would like it to be the Timberwolves.
All right. Nuggets, OKC. Colborn?
OKC.
Untitled?
I'll say Nuggets to be contrarian.
Pacers, Cavs. Remember the Pacers are up 2-0?
No way, really?
Yeah. Well,
the Cavs are going to come back.
All right. Untitled, what do you think?
I hope the Cavs come back. That was brutal last game.
And then Knicks, Celtics, what do we think?
New York, baby.
I'm going to say neither. I don't want nothing to do with either of those.
I got OKC, Warriors. I'm going to take the Pacers, and I'm going to take the Celtics. So we'll have to return back here in about 2 months and see how we all did. Now that
That
we're on
sounds
the record.
good.
Cool. Untitled and Colborn, as always, appreciate your insight and your participation and your presence. So thank you guys very much for being here. Thank you, everybody who was here with us elsewhere. Thank you, Emotional, for popping by. For anyone listening, this has been the MOCA Live podcast. Please like, subscribe, rate us 5 stars. I don't think anyone's ever done that, but maybe you could be the first. And follow us on Substack at museumofcrypto.substack.com, where we have a newsletter coming out every week on Sunday.
Buy Art Decos.
Yeah, buy Art Decos. They're real cheap, and maybe they won't be for so long. Yeah, and get a room too. You want a room pass? Hit one of us up. We'll make it happen. So cool. Thanks everyone for being here. Colborn Untitled, thank you very much, and we'll see everybody real soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.